Intellectual Property is proudly brought to you by Adams & Adams, rooted in 100 years of excellence in intellectual property law.
Welcome to Intellectual Property Show on Summit. I'm Stefan Lamprecht. Today we're going to talk about how our biggest oil giant, Sasol, is making use of intellectual property to secure and enhance shareholder value. Our studio guest tonight is Claire Duggan from Sasol. Welcome, Claire.
Thanks, Stefan.
Claire, just to start off with, tell us a little bit about what you do at Sasol.
I am an in-house intellectual property legal advisor at Sasol, one of the number of such intellectual property legal advisors, and our role is to enhance Sasol's competitive advantage through intellectual property initiatives. Okay. We do this by assisting with extracting intellectual property and by protecting our intellectual property through obtaining intellectual property rights. Okay. And through carefully drafted agreements pertaining to intellectual property. These two activities are underpinned by our intellectual property strategy being aligned with our technology and business strategies.
Okay.
And then we have a role in understanding the competitive landscape in the field in which we are engaged, so as to avoid the infringement of the intellectual property rights of third parties.
Okay. So, I mean, Sasol being an international company, a truly global South African company, how do you use intellectual property to get that competitive edge in the global markets?
Well, our intellectual property initiatives in that regard include protecting our inventions by way of patents in countries of interest to us, and we thereby grow our patent portfolio. Insofar as mechanisms for protecting our corporate and our product brands are concerned, we register trademarks, once again in countries that are of interest to us, for example, where we may have offices or where our products may be sold.
Okay.
And also securing domain name registrations, which, as you may know, is a component of a website address.
Okay.
And we seek to rigorously protect our trademarks and our domain names and to police the correct use thereof. And then another initiative would be to manage our trade secrets.
Okay. Now, it's quite fascinating if you think about the Sasol brand on the rugby shirts. It's quite a wide portfolio of intellectual property that you have to manage.
That's quite correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned the whole thing of trade secrets. I think we more or less understand what's meant by patenting, but how do you go about the strategy for protecting trade secrets?
Well, as I've suggested, Sasol has intellectual property assets that are in the form of trade secrets, and we do commercially exploit some of those, and that to derive competitive advantage once again. And how we would go about protecting them would be to prevent our own disclosure thereof, and also to guard against the improper taking of those trade secrets by others.
Yeah.
We have an internal policy which provides a framework for the protection of our trade secrets, and the process would include such steps as identifying those things that may be appropriate for trade secret protection, and then a process of approving trade secret protection as opposed to any other form of protection in a particular case, and then of course managing access to the trade secret.
Okay. So you got a choice: either you got to go the patenting route or you got to go the trade secret route.
Yes, it's not always possible to protect everything by way of patent, and in some instances it may be more appropriate to maintain something as confidential, and those would be factors that would bear upon that decision.
Well, I'm very glad that you mentioned that, because thinking about the current landscape, there's a lot of discussion about this public-funded, the bill on public-funded intellectual property, where there's a huge encouragement for academic institutions and so forth to pursue patent strategies and to patent more, increase the number of patents. It's obviously you can't afford to patent everything, even being a large company like Sasol. What is your view on that?
That's quite correct, Stefan. It becomes fairly costly, but it is an important component of IP protection mechanisms. And as I suggested, in each case, you should consider the merits of the various forms of protection that are available.
Can you expand a little bit on that? I mean, in which instances would you typically go for the trade secret route rather than the patent route?
Well, patenting an idea ultimately results in that idea falling into the public domain.
Okay.
And that would be a fairly important factor if you would like to retain the information as confidential for as long a period as possible.
Yeah.
That would factor into that decision.
Okay. You're a huge company. In South African terms, you're listed on the JSE, you're listed on the New York Stock Exchange. What you're describing here and the strategy that you take, is that only applicable for large companies? What if I'm a smaller company or representative of the more medium-sized companies in South Africa?
Yes, I'd say certainly not exclusively for Sasol.
Okay.
It's my personal view that intellectual property protection can be beneficial for small or medium-sized enterprises as well.
Okay.
Most small or medium-sized enterprises have trade names or one or more trademarks that they make use of and which they should consider protecting. Virtually every product and service that we make use of in daily life is the result of a chain of either small or big innovations, such as design changes or improvements that make a product look or function as it does. And I would say regardless of the type of product that an enterprise makes or the type of service that it offers, it is likely that they will regularly use and create intellectual property. And intellectual property may assist a small or medium-sized enterprise in many aspects of its business development and its competitive strategy, be it product development or marketing or raising finance or expanding the business through licensing. So it can be a valuable business asset for a small or medium enterprise, as it is for Sasol.
Okay. So it's everyone's business, big and small, it doesn't matter. Thank you very much, Claire, for joining us tonight, and thank you for your inputs. Thank you for joining us again this week to talk about the practical insights into the business behind intellectual property at Sasol. Next week we will take a closer look at the role of intellectual property in supporting local innovation. Until next time, from Stefan Lamprecht, good night.
Intellectual Property was proudly brought to you by Adams & Adams, rooted in 100 years of excellence in intellectual property law.